when it comes to recruiting volunteers, there are probably hundreds of factors that impact that, whether positively or negatively, in terms of, is it helping you recruit? Is it hurting your recruitment? And many of those we have control over, and then many of those factors we don't. But there are some things that we do have control over that I would consider to be game changers in volunteer recruitment. Meaning, if you can do this and move this forward, it will have a huge impact on volunteer recruitment. And one of those game changers is your time. Spending your time. How much time do you spend on volunteer recruitment? This is a question that I've asked before, and I would love to ask you the same question. How much time do you spend on recruiting volunteers each week? When I've asked that before in different settings, at a conference, in a breakout or something like that, I get a lot of the same answers. I get 0 hours a week, 1 hour a week, maybe 2. Sometimes people will say 2, and very rarely somebody will say more than 2 hours a week. And the number of people that say 0 hours a week usually is 80% of the people in the room, maybe even 90%. And I would say 98% of the people in the room say 2 hours or less, or really 1 hour or less. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment. Let me know how many hours you spend a week on recruiting volunteers. The reason this is a game changer is because we're not going to get the results we want if we're not putting the time in to recruiting. And so why don't we spend enough time? Well, we've got to write a message to preach. If we're leading student ministry, we have to schedule volunteers. We've got volunteers that aren't showing up this weekend, and we got to find a replacement for them. And so we're working on that. We're in staff meeting. We're in our team meetings. We're preparing curriculum and editing that. We're distributing that to volunteers. We're preparing the large group environments where we're getting pro presenter ready, and we got to go get some resources for this here. And then, oh yeah, that's right, there was this other thing that our entire staff is doing that I have to be a part of. There's just so many things that are urgent that volunteer recruiting seems to get pushed out, doesn't it? It's like, I know I need to do it, but especially it gets pushed out because it's hard to know if the time we're putting in is working. Whereas these other things that I'm talking about, you put the time in, you do that work, and you see the results. Like, you see the curriculum get edited and sent out, or the message get written and ready. With volunteer recruiting, it's a little hard sometimes to see the connection between the hours we put in and what we get out of it. But there is certainly a connection. So how much time should we spend each week in recruiting? If you are just starting out with implementing a new recruiting plan, like we would teach at ministryboost.org through some of our courses and our membership there, then I think you have to spend a lot more time on the front end. And don't get scared here, but I think you could spend as much as 6 to 8 hours a week for the first month, just the first month, implementing a volunteer recruiting strategy like we teach. Now, that's just the first month. In fact, I could see the first month being 8 hours a week, which is a lot. The second month coming down to like maybe 4 hours a week. And then by month 3, you're 2 hours a week. And that's kind of like maintenance mode. And you can recruit volunteers all the time, all year long, on just 2 hours a week for your church, if you have a plan in place and you've set that, strategy up like we're talking about. So it doesn't have to be 8 hours a week forever. That doesn't even work. Like, what could you actually be doing with that? But in the first month or two, you would spend about 6 to 8 hours a week just implementing a volunteer recruiting strategy like we teach about for your ministry. And then eventually you could do that on just 2 hours a week. And the truth is, it'll be kind of seasonal. There'll be that time when it's like, okay, we have the strategy in place. We already ran it. We're not running that part of the strategy again for another few months. And then a few months come around, it's like, okay, I'm actually spending 5 hours a week the first 2 weeks here, getting this rolling again. But then I spend 30 minutes that week and, 1 hour over here that week. So it kind of does ebb and flow. But I think one of the key things to leveraging this game changer is to always be working on it. Whether it's 30 minutes here and then 4 hours the next week, or 2 hours and 2 hours and 2 hours, you want to always be working on it. And one way to ensure that is to create a template schedule. What is your template recruiting schedule? One schedule that I like to use and prefer is having time allotted on Monday mornings and Thursday afternoons. So Monday mornings, I would typically have 2 hours, and I'm going over the weekend. Who did we talk with? Who is apprenticing? Who showed up to a volunteer orientation? Like, we're kind of following up on all the things that happened over the weekend. And then you're sending emails, you're reaching out to people as well as part of the recruiting process. And then Thursday, I follow up. Who did I hear back from? What meetings are scheduled for this weekend? Am I ready for that volunteer orientation that's going to happen this weekend? I like that because I would typically work and still do work a Sunday to Thursday schedule on staff at my church. And so I like having a little bit of time on the front end, a little bit of time on the back end. The other thing is part of the recruiting process is having conversations. And so you have to make time in there for that works with other people's schedules. So there's, a good chance that you may need to allot some time on every Tuesday night from 5 to 6 or, 7 to 8 or something like that, where you could schedule calls with people. I personally love to try to meet with people and have conversations around weekend services. That's my preference. But obviously, if you're serving children's ministry, there's a lot going on there. And so that might not be your preference. You might want to do that during the week. But no matter what it is, create a template schedule. How many hours you're going to spend? When are you going to spend it? And then also, what are you going to spend that time doing? You can even have that kind of built into your template schedule. I'm going to send emails and texts and follow up on the weekend on Mondays. And I'm going to send confirmation emails about meetings and plan for what's going to happen this weekend on Thursdays. Here's what I know. We can talk about putting in the time. We can talk about how important the time is, and it really is important. It makes one of the biggest differences in recruiting volunteers or not for your church. But few people, in my experience, do this well without accountability. There are some, I think if at my church, a friend of mine is Keith, and Keith is one of the most disciplined people I know. He wakes up at 5 a.m., maybe earlier than that, goes to the gym every morning, and so much of his life is so well disciplined and organized. Keith would do this, no problem, if he committed to it. I, on the other hand, not so much. I would probably need some accountability. So go to whoever leads you on staff at your church and ask for them to hold you accountable. Show them your template schedule. Say, here's what I'm thinking. And then I want you to ask me about it every time we meet. So if you meet with them every other week or monthly or whatever that looks like, or maybe you don't control that and you don't have a meeting monthly with whoever leads you. You could ask for one. That would be a good place to start, or just try to find accountability somewhere else. I prefer for that to come from whoever leads you because that carries the most weight, but it could be a friend, somebody else in ministry, another staff person. You're going to hold each other accountable to recruiting volunteers. I think accountability is huge though, because it's going to help ensure that you actually do it. I just think it's easy to let the week come at you again. You got to edit that curriculum. You got to write that message. You got to schedule those volunteers. And before you know it, you've lost another week without recruiting. So if you want to recruit more volunteers, definitely find a way to spend more time doing that. We have a bunch of resources, courses, downloads at ministryboost.org that can help you recruit volunteers. We have a course called Volunteer Boost that kind of gives you our 5-part framework. If you want, you can check that out. And if you also want to learn more about some game changers for volunteer recruiting, check out this next video when it launches. That's another game changer important to help you boost volunteer recruitment in your church.